So this is the FNAF ultimate thing, like the ultimate thing. Watch me play it, and it's the LARP version instead.
19 books, 11
Let me know if you could
games,
hear it
8
pretty good.
whole years, all leading to this moment. The ultimate FNAF timeline.
He actually has his YouTube audio for his
place
videos really good.
Now all we have to do is put this story of tragedy, jealousy, and loss
I'm a legend?
together.
Well, am I a legend? I thought Matpat was the legend. Alright, let's react to this.
Hello, internet. Well,
by the way, should we change this up? Speak French, Spanish.
Welcome to Game Theory, the show that feels like a kid revealing the class project that he's been working on all year. Except
so
here,
this is
it's
literally
the class project that I've
thing
been
is,
working
it's
on
part
for the past
1 out of
decade
2
of my life. This one is big, my friends, and I gotta admit, kind of nervous.
Oh wait,
I haven't
oops, sorry.
attempted a timeline video on
this
franchise since 2018. Back in the days when Mike was the crying child, Afton coming back was actually a surprise, and Fazgoo wasn't a phrase I'd ever thought I'd have to utter. But since the last time I did something like this, we've had 3 more massive games, the death and revival of the FNAF movie, and more robot kids than you can shake a staff bot at. It is exhausting trying to keep track of this whole franchise, which honestly is why I'm here today.
That fucker. I just seen that fucker that
killed.
I can't speak French.
Of speculation and theory. So to hopefully make it a little easier for everyone and to give us all a baseline to talk about this franchise moving forward into the future, it's time to reveal my current working FNAF timeline.
Current? When was this? When did he make this?
First, this timeline is massive. Seriously,
massive
it is
timeline.
Huge. This thing towers over any video project we have ever done on the channel. But when
I forgot he did Pokemon shit where the dude Pikachu was always what, level 60?
Look at the totality of this franchise. The story of FNAF really boils down to the story of one man, William Afton. His successes, his failures, his rise to becoming co-owner of one
William
of the most
Afton is
restaurant
not
franchises in the world,
is that
and his
confirmed?
eventual fall to
Joe,
the monsters
you're here?
he helped to create, only to then be reborn in a new digital form later. That's why I've decided to split this timeline into 3 main chunks: the foundation of Freddy's, how the business started and how it came into being; the Afton era, William's decades-long murder spree; and post-Purple Guy. Basically modern FNAF. Everything that happens after the pizzeria.
I wonder, he talks about the books too, right?
Lots of new big revelations in this thing that seemingly
where like it's all screwed up or something.
Just points I want to talk about further. I decided to dedicate 1 episode to each chunk. I
oh my god!
wanted it to be one seamless, continuous video.
He could have did it
incomplete without some sort of explanation at the end of each one. Once this
would have been an hour in animation, but that's good though. An hour animation is cool. People can sleep through it.
For now, this just felt like the best, most satisfying,
yeah, that's why I said Scrap Trap.
Do this. That being said, this is still about the story.
Oh, he is Scrap Trap? What the heck?
Franchise. So in order to make sure that you guys know that
it's just that he looks scrappy.
Out of thin air, not only am I discussing some of the more controversial bits at the end of each chunk,
oh,
also
that was
putting a
Gregory.
handy little graphic in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, which will show thumbnails, video titles, books, and any other citations that we need throughout the video. So if you wish to understand that specific statement in more detail, you know exactly where we've taken it from. That way you can look into those details.
Or if it's even him.
So sit back,
because he has like 5 people helping him, right? Or like 3.
If you're the type to get upset when I say something controversial, and make sure that you subscribe, since this is going to be a video that you're going to want to come back to a few times in order to fully dissect. Without any more waiting, I present to you the story of a loving, obsessive father who slowly descended into madness, and along the way discovered the secret.
Was he always purple though? Is he going to explain that?
Our story begins not in the 1980s.
Oh wait, hold on.
1970s, but all the way back in the 1930s.
1930s.
It was the throes of the Great Depression, and people were in desperate need of cheap entertainment, especially
I've watched
in
Matpat.
Utah, one of the states hit hardest, 4th highest unemployment in the nation, and full of transients. People looking for work in Salt Lake, finding none, and ultimately moving on to find their
like his theories; they're always cool.
People were tired.
The only problem with,
but as they traveled, there was one thing that could lift their spirits: a simple roadside attraction.
Really? Do you on my
Fredbear's Singing Show? The ads were plastered all over town, featuring an animated bear.
Oh, this is supposed to be
style for characters at the time.
Springtrap,
he resembled cartoons
the Golden
like
Bunny and Golden Freddy, right?
Immediately said that this Fredbear's
is that what's supposed to be for this genre or this era?
Honestly, couldn't be beat. For 50 cents, you could get food and entertainment as you watched the local trained real-life dancing bear perform on stage. Normally, you only got to see dancing bears at large traveling circuses like Barnum and Bailey.
I'm guessing something happened.
For about $1. That's $1 without food. But this was a smaller show, like the type from the Von Brothers or the Robbins Brothers, where tickets would sell for just a mere 50 cents. Watching that bear do tricks on stage brought a glimmer of joy at a time when so
50
much
cents
was
for
wrong with the world.
50 cents to watch a talking to watch a dancing bear.
Passing through looking for a quick meal,
I mean, if it's 50 cents, somebody's gonna die.
On one little boy, capturing his imagination in a way that nothing else had. One little boy named Billy. That was his nickname at least, but his parents like to call him William. William Afton. The bear could dance. It could sing. For decades, William dreamed of recreating that moment.
I think the only problem with Matpat's theories is that they were so good that people would actually make their game lore based off his theories.
Was using rudimentary costumes.
That's one thing I
William was
didn't
inspired by the work of Walt Disney, who throughout the 50s and 60s was pioneering the use of mascot suits throughout his theme park. The big innovation? Suits with 5 fingers. This allowed the performers wearing the suits to use their natural arms and hands to interact with the guests, as opposed to the older models where the arms would just hang limply by their sides. Finally, with a simple mascot suit, he would be able to realize his childhood dream. He would be able to bring Fredbear to life. To appeal to the kids, and for copyright reasons, he changed Fredbear from a realistic brown animal to a cartoonish yellow bear with a purple hat and bow tie. But feeling like one character wasn't enough, he added another friend, a yellow rabbit with a purple vest and matching tie named Bonnie the Bunny.
Why does he look so creepy in this one?
His first love, Bonnie was extra
to be fair,
Springtrap's
always been creepy.
It was an original character that he had created from scratch. And I do mean scratch. William's hand-sewn costumes were rough, with seams and stitches visibly showing, but it was the best
It is creepy. Look at that.
It was just enough. Bonnie and Fredbear would perform on stage to small but enthusiastic
I loved this minigame was
Finally,
freaking cool.
Deliver fantasy and fun to all the kids,
Fnaf 3,
delighting
really
and
cool.
inspiring them in the exact way that he had been delighted and inspired so many years ago. And things could have ended there. That could have been the end to his story. It could have been perfect had it not been for
he had
one thing. Other people saw
crazy.
the success of his idea and they wanted in. Enter Chica's Party World, a rival restaurant starring performing animal characters. His idea, except they did it better. William may have been the first, but obviously he wasn't the best. It hurt the prideful William Afton to admit it, but this restaurant was able to do the thing that he always wanted to do: make the animals actually come to life. All the performers in this restaurant were robots, simple metal skeletons that were powered by battery packs, but all of them able to freely turn and talk and dance on their own, no human required. It was like magic, magic that came from the mind of a guy used
black magic.
Emily. This Henry, in some small way, had been able to harness
you know what's crazy?
The power of life itself.
Is that if I don't know if I'm wrong, or I don't know if I'm wrong, but didn't the new games, The Secret of the Mimic, didn't that like completely try to wipe out whatever theory or whatever lore they were going for with the games to like basically make everything untrue so they could restart from scratch? Isn't that what they did?
Be sure, but he also looked upon this man with awe. Off to one side of Chica's Party World was a small cabaret stage.
Who's the one that hates these? Who's the one that hates these?
A hippo known to ramble on and on. That one was more of a joke for the parents, but it was the main stage that was for the kids. A rocking band of characters featuring a yellow chicken thing with a southern drawl named Chica, backed by a band of other country-themed characters, including a pig with a banjo, an upbeat frog from the local swimming hole, and a brown bear with a heavy southern accent. Wait. A bear? But bears were his animals. Why not a cow or a horse? Something to fit the country theme a bit better. Why'd it have to be a bear? And adding
because
insult
the bear is
injury,
cuddly
they had
and
the nerve
cute.
to call this thing Ned Bear, a direct copy of his own Fred Bear.
Whoops, that's gonna leave a mark.
No, that was not okay. Afton's jealous admiration turned to hardened bitterness. A bitterness that would only grow over the next couple of years as families continued to choose Chica's Party World over Fredbear's. William just couldn't compete with the appeal of the robots. Eventually, his restaurant would go bankrupt, only to get bailed out by, of course, Henry Emily. Another insult, another humiliation.
No, next game is gonna be Five Nights at Freddy's.
1979. Despite being bitter, Afton couldn't deny that what came next was a period of massive success and expansion. With the two franchises now merged into one, it was the best of both worlds. Afton's ideas with Henry's robotic expertise. The two men decided to launch under a new name, Fredbear's Family Diner, a pizza chain that would eventually come to feature a mix of humans in performing suits as well as on-stage animatronics. They decided to stick with Fredbear as the headliner, considering the yellow bear was easily identifiable as a brand and because he was the original performing animal mascot. mascot. Afton appreciated that. This new restaurant would also see a mix of characters as the two franchises merged into one, with Pig Patch and Happy Frog performing right alongside Fredbear and Bonnie.
Yeah,
and as part of this one big Fredbear family, they even got themselves official merch that were released, ranging from masks to magnets.
The crappy Mr. Hippo fridge magnet?
What's your opinion on
that said,
Security
not all
Breach?
the characters
I think
were
it's
winners. The reception
decent,
to some characters was
a game
just
I would never get scared
mediocre. So they faded away into the dumpster, storage units, and retro budget tech stores of lost nostalgia, waiting for their chance to step back into the limelight if and when a headliner went out of commission. Others, though, would fare much better, like a new Pirate Fox, as well as a blue guitar-playing variant of the yellow Bonnie Bunny. Ultimately, the franchise would get so big, it would spawn its own cartoon show,
You think it's a
Fredbear
W?
and
Really?
Friends. Business was booming. In the end, Fredbear and Bonnie's
You
popularity
just like the
would be
open
so
world,
strong that they would be
stuff?
able to support the Fredbear's Family Diner franchise all on their own, while
Why
also
would they
spinning
make
off a new
Freddy look
sister
like that?
location
Or why would
dedicated
he
to their
pick that
friends. In
PNG?
1983, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza launched, giving a dedicated home to all this new supporting cast of characters. Chica the
Why is
Chicken
it only
Bonnie,
19
the
minutes
Blue
long?
Bunny,
That's
Foxy the
lame.
Pirate, and of course the headliner, a brown Freddy Fazbear. Business was good, and Afton was happy, mostly. It
should've said
did
business was
bother him
booming.
that the one original character that he created, the one that he himself played, Golden Bonnie, got passed over for inclusion in that cartoon show. The only
there's a good reason why
character
they
in the
didn't want
roster
that
of
in the
regulars to get
frickin-
ignored for the show, but
Oh,
other than that,
alrighty.
things were going smoothly. He had himself a wife, 2 sons, a daughter. He had a thriving business, and best of all, he was able to learn the craft of robotics from the man that he both loved and hated, Henry. Together, they were constantly pushing the limits of what these characters could do. Because it was quick and easy, new characters introduced into the roster would be given a simple hand-sewn suit with 5 fingers that any performer could wear. Eventually, Henry would design one of his signature animatronics for that character, utilizing a divided mouth with either a hinged or sliding jaw design. This was the first generation of animatronics. But why stop there? Afton had big ideas. What if the animatronics weren't just locked to the stage, but could freely roam the restaurant and interact with the kids? What if his mascot suits could become animatronics? What if you could use more than just rigid metallic skeletons? Why not experiment with tubes and wires that would give the animatronics fluidity and flexibility while still
Sister
providing
Location is
structure?
freaking.
The possibilities for this technology were endless.
I don't know the
Afton
freaking
fell
word.
in love with robotics.
Well,
He had
that's what I watched in
started
the
with a
video.
dream of bringing
Explain
one
it.
simple singing bear to life, but with robots, he had stumbled across the tools that gave him the ability to control life itself. And thanks to Henry,
What?
he was practically speedrunning his way to an engineering degree. And while William wouldn't admit it out loud, one other thing that kept pushing him forward was the desire to beat his former rival, to prove
Well, that's
himself
pretty weird and
smarter
risky.
and more capable,
Oh,
to
oh,
surpass
the-
the man
the-
who everyone else considered to be a visionary genius. But pride cometh before the fall, and tragedy
outfits.
was about to strike. Okay, so that brings us to the end of part 1 of the story. That said, at the end of each of these chunks, I want to break down some of the logical leaps that I made, since the more narrative format doesn't give me much of a chance to justify a lot of the big decisions. And admittedly, there are some large leaps in here. Let's just start off with Fredbear's Singing Show, shall we? We know, based on the retro poster that was hidden in Security Breach, that at least at one point, Fredbear was an actual bear. And like I called out in that narrative segment, dancing bear shows were a real form of entertainment. The only problem is that, timing-wise, none of our main characters would be the people in charge of that business in the 30s and a series of pizza restaurants in the 80s without him just being extremely old. Best case scenario, if Afton's running the singing show when he's 18, that still puts him at nearly 70 when the first pizzeria opens and his murder spree begins. That just doesn't make a lot of logical sense because he doesn't become immortal until his first death in Springtrap. That's why I suspect that Fredbear's Singing Show was either a family business that Afton then carried on to a new generation.
That is true. It probably is. It probably was a family
kid
business.
and just wanted to recreate when he grew up. The Fredbear Singing Show thing also starts laying the groundwork for some of the core elements of the story. That Freddy's was a place of fantasy and fun, and that Afton, despite eventually falling to become the heartless serial killer and mad scientist that we know him as, began as someone with good intentions and a love of entertaining kids. He wanted to bring things to life from the very beginning.
How did he go from
the franchise?
inspiring kids to do shit to murdering them?
One thing that I keep going back to
Doesn't
is
really
the
make any
design
sense.
of Glitch Trap. It's a handcrafted suit. You can see the seams and everything. It even has 5 fingers fingers for the performer's hands. It is
Maybe
very
you
much
stop
not
really,
a
really
Springtrap
hard
suit. This is
and
something
just
much
made
more
up
rudimentary.
theories.
It came at a time before animatronics were a
Which
part of the story.
made
That's why I suspect that it was actually
sometimes
the
makes
first,
sense. I think also
predating
add stuff into the
everything.
game that kind of makes
It's also a
sense
suit that
too.
is very personal to Afton. He put his digital consciousness in that form. It's his personal avatar. It's the
That's
way
where
that
it's
he
trippy.
sees himself.
Digital
There's also a whole separate
consciousness.
discussion to be had here about the habits and rituals of serial killers. So the fact that he's choosing to lure kids and kill them in this particular suit actually says a lot about his emotional attachment to it. So while Fredbear seems to have started as someone else's creation, Golden Bonnie was uniquely Williams, giving him a personal
And he could keep it.
connection.
That
And
shit
that's
looks
not all.
ugly.
In this whole franchise, only one set of characters have themselves 5 fingers, the Nightmares. Even Golden Freddy, Fredbear, was a 5-fingered wearable suit at one point in the story, as we see in this
Yeah,
shot
it's
from
called
the
Glitch
graphic
Trap,
novel,
yeah.
before he, like everyone else, was turned into an animatronic. This
'Cause
seems
of
to
that-
imply that all of
which
the main
is weird.
characters had similar wearable mascot
Actually not that
outfits
weird.
at least at one point in time, and that whoever is having
Because
the
in the
Fnaf 4
when he first
nightmares,
appears,
if
it makes
they even
sense.
are nightmares, something that we'll touch on in part 2,
This
saw
actually
those
is glitchy.
mascot suits specifically. Lastly, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the literal elephant, Orville Elephant, as well as the rest of the mediocre melodies. For a while now, I've suspected that the mediocre melodies played a much more important role in the story.
So
than
the
just being
mediocre
a bunch
melodies
more
are just
animatronics to
knockoffs?
fill out the roster, especially Ned Bear, which is just so
I didn't know that.
suspiciously close to Fred Bear. And yet, there are 2 key details that we're going to have to justify with
I think
any
I like them
mediocre
more 'cause they
melodies
don't
mentioned.
try to
One,
murder
they're
you
very rudimentary with external
when
battery
you're literally
packs,
trying to just
implying that they come
unclog the
very
toilets
early in
or
the
something.
timeline. And 2, we know that at minimum, Mr. Hippo does eventually become an official
yeah,
member of
Mr.
the
Hippo
extended
does come
Freddyverse.
back.
But if these things are supposed to be cheap, generic rip-offs, why would you be trying to rip off yourself? You wouldn't. You would be stealing someone else's ideas. So if Afton created Fredbear, there would have to be some rival franchise. The only other
Henry?
person who would likely be ripping him off, Henry.
Yeah.
We've talked extensively about how the mediocre melodies are clearly Henry's design aesthetic, so it just has to be him. I don't think Henry's doing this maliciously. He doesn't strike me as the type. He was likely building the robots at the orders of someone else that was running a rival restaurant franchise. But that's
That makes
enough
sense.
motivation to start Afton down a path of jealous rivalry, but also begrudging admiration. As the Freddy Files Ultimate Edition says, it's important to revisit the beginning of Henry and William's relationship, so here you go. I think this is where it begins. Also, this is future Matpat here coming back to add this one in. Seems like the recently
mic
released
also changed?
character encyclopedia has backed up all of this speculation. I've had this timeline written for about a month now, but I've also been holding off a bit to see what wrenches this character encyclopedia might throw into it. And on this particular point, I gotta say, it seems like we might actually have nailed it. They actively call out the suspicious similarities to the main Fredbear crew. Quote from one of the pages: Ned Bear looks like an imitation, altered just enough to avoid copyright issues. I don't know about you, but that seems to imply that
Oh my
you're
god,
right on the
it
money.
legit
Knowing
is a
all of this,
knockoff
at
though.
one
They
point,
gave
the
this dude a
franchises had to have
freaking
merged.
set of
That's
bow
really the
tie
only
and
way to
actual
get
just
Mr.
tie.
Hippo from the rival franchise as part of the Fazbear crew. This also mirrors a lot of what happened in the real-life history of Chuck E. Cheese, with 2 rival restaurants,
Oh my
each with their own
god,
casts
bro.
of characters merging to become
Dude,
one
these
unified
look-
brand.
oh my
Again, we've
god.
gone into that in detail
Oh
with other
my-
videos, just wanted to remind you all of that here. But why would I call out the rival restaurant
Dude.
as being named Chica?
They look, the real life animatronics look so much scarier than the freaking ones that's been scaring kids for like a couple years.
Chica's Party World. Few things actually. First, we know for a fact that a location named Chica's Party World exists. It is mentioned in the source code teasing sister location,
Yeah,
so it is out there somewhere and doesn't
know
fit
what it is.
cleanly anywhere. Second, in the story The Puppet Carver, Chica is very explicitly looped in with the book versions of Pig Patch and Ned Bear, implying that she started as a mediocre melody. Thirdly, her design just fits better with a theme of down-home country animals with southern accents playing the banjo and eating with bibs. And with her being the headliner of the show with her name on the restaurant, it would make sense then that when the restaurants merged, she was the one that was added to the main cast of
makes sense.
characters, while all the other mediocres faded
That actually
away.
makes sense.
It's also why when Freddy's closes after William's killing spree, she's the one to branch back off into her old franchise and is therefore missing in sister location, a detail that's bothered me for years at this point. It might also explain why William decided to stuff his first dead kid into Chica. That one was Henry's
That
creation,
makes
not
sense.
his. Is all of this a big leap? Yeah. Is it connecting a lot of dots that are very spread out across the franchise that I've been holding on in the back of my mind for years? Absolutely. But I think it makes sense. It also serves as a clean answer to a lot of the random threads that Scott's been leaving dangling for years. years. So with all of that in mind, my friends, we can close the book on the foundation of Freddy's. And don't worry, next week I'll be back to give you arguably one of the most confusing parts of this entire timeline situation. Part 2, the Afton era. I promise it will actually
This Afton era is going to be dope.
No more waiting around.
It.
I am just as eager to get this one out the door as you are to watch it. I promise. You know what else I promise? I promise that we'll actually get to talking about the games. I would have liked to have talked about them in this episode, but there just isn't that much in the games that helps us depict anything pre-Family Diner. Although, let's be honest, this franchise has never been just about the games anyway. Even back in the early days of FNAF, we were decoding images and source code that Scott fed us through the website. The modern day books and the clues that we get from those things, now they're just modern extensions of that. All of it is crucial to understanding this franchise and its lore. Unless, of course, Steel Wool finally gets around to making that Fredbear's Family Diner game they want to make so badly.
I've always would love to do is get kind of back to, I have no clue if we'll ever be able to do this, but getting back to kind of like the origin of like Fazbear Entertainment, or the origin of
did they ever make that?
Fazbear.
But in the meantime, while we wait for that inevitably cryptic game, I hope that this start to the timeline helps to fill in some of those gaps. I'm excited to share part 2 with you next week. If you haven't...
All right, part 2.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, and officially page 7 of the FNAF timeline script. Last time we covered the origins of Freddy's. We talked about William Afton's childhood dream project of making a singing bear come to life, and the infuriating moment that his dream is copied by a rival restaurant franchise looking to steal away his success. The merger of the two franchises results in William meeting Henry, a brilliant designer with a knack for robotics. Working together,
when does he
they
become
make
crazy?
Fredbear's flourish, spawning
I can't wait to
popular
see that.
Saturday morning cartoon shows, toy lines, and spin-off restaurants under the Fazbear name. When last we left him, Afton was thriving. The world of robotics opening his eyes to new and exciting ways of
I forgot I was playing a
characters
scary
to
game,
life.
so I turned it
Bringing
down.
things to life. Yeah, that was his core driving force, his passion. And it was this very passion that would mutate, twist, and morph from here on out in the story. Because with life, there is inevitably death.
Does he just cut so much corners
intimately familiar with.
that
But before Afton
screws
acquaints
everything?
himself with death, I want you to take some time to acquaint yourself with our newest channel. Guys, this is a huge part 2 where things are about to get dark in a hurry.
He did like a, I think I've seen that channel before.
Business was booming
when he
with
did like
2
shaving
whole
stuff.
restaurant franchises
Like,
running.
what's the best
Fredbear's
razor?
Family Diner and the new
That was really good.
Freddy
I like that one.
Fazbear's Pizza. Together, William and Henry had been able to take the hybrid suit idea and make it into a reality. They called their new invention the Springlock suit. And fittingly enough, it was symbolic of the partnership between these two men. A human suit as designed by William that could become a freestanding Henry-style robot. But because it was still new tech with kinks to work out, the rollout was limited, restricted only to the Fredbear's Family Diner location. All of this meant that William was busier than ever. He didn't have time to be a full-time parent, so he designed a nanny cam system where cameras and speakers were hidden throughout the neighborhood, as well as in his youngest son's favorite toy, Psychic Friend Fredbear. I mean,
that
plushy
creepy-ass
Fredbear.
freaking
But
plushie
since
dude?
cameras just weren't enough to raise a kid, he also left childcare duties to his eldest son, Michael. There was just one problem with that. Michael was far from the best babysitter. He tormented his younger brother by jump-scaring him with a Foxy mask and constantly left him behind. William watched all of it from his cameras. Kids would be kids. Tomorrow was another day, after all. Except Michael's torment didn't stop. Bitter, angry thoughts would run through Michael's mind. Why did he have to be the one to take care of this whining crybaby all the time?
I guess that's cool.
It just
connecting,
wasn't fair. It was time that he got even with his brother by playing the ultimate prank. A prank that just so happened to be on this crying child's birthday. He and his friends would take his scared little brother and make him do the one thing that he was terrified of doing, getting close to the animatronics. That would be embarrassing for the kid that was such an embarrassment to him. His brother squirmed, screamed, kicked, and fought, but just as they were putting that small, squirming boy up to Fredbear's lips, the mouth snapped shut. The sensitive spring locks inside the body had been
Was that the bite of 87?
And they'd immediately clamped down. The wriggling stopped. The boy went limp.
Yeah.
It was just a prank. It was meant to be funny. The boy was taken to the hospital and was immediately given an IV. Flowers and pills filled the nightstand next to his hospital bed, but the damage was too severe. He couldn't recover. As the younger brother's consciousness began to fade, he could hear Michael's last words, a small and flimsy apology. But his father, Williams, through the voice of the Fredbear plush, were a firm and committed promise to a dying son. You're broken. I will put you back together. This
that makes a lot of sense.
No matter what, William's son would live again.
You know what? That that makes a lot of sense as to why he ends up being crazy a little bit. I would say that the song is outdated and that he has some. Is it Matpat though? If it's not Matpat, no, I don't want to look at it. It makes sense why Purple Guy would end up trying to help his son that got screwed over because he didn't bother trying to take care of him. That makes a lot of sense as of right now.
that right now
Yeah, maybe
he
next
just didn't
stream, yeah.
have. His young son's heart flatlined.
We could watch
The boy
this one
faded
and
into
then
inky
a follow-up
unknown
as to
of
what got
afterlife. In the
changed.
aftermath of the tragedy, changes
This
started
is
happening
before
around
Ruin, and so something doesn't make sense. Yeah, because these games. Yeah, the thing with Secret of the Mimic, I think I already said it, is that in my opinion, it feels like the lore was already screwed up, or somebody screwed it up, and then they used Secret of the Mimic to basically rewrite everything. That's why I think what they did.
restaurants.
Could be
Kids
wrong.
were now required to wear security wristbands to prevent anyone from getting outside without parental permission. Any kid
'Cause I
who
don't think they
approached the
connect, do
exit
they?
without
Or they
permission would
connect
have
with the
to
book?
answer to the security puppet.
I don't know,
We'll
find that
could
out
fly around
maybe
on
tomorrow.
rails across the restaurant to stop kids in their tracks. It was William's idea, inspired by Michael constantly leaving the restaurant without his brother. In the wake of Fredbear's spring lock failure, all the hybrid suits were getting retired, locked away at the nearby Freddy Fazbear location. It was yet
That's where
another
he
tough pill to
connected
swallow after
that
all the
stuff.
hard work that he and Henry had put into them. William would eventually bury the boy's small body in a remote location out in the woods right alongside his drive into and out of work every day. The death of this little boy sent the family spiraling. His wife, crippled with grief, was so distraught that all she
The
could do was
universe
sit and
changed or
watch
whatever?
TV. But his son Michael was far worse, complaining of seeing hallucinations of a golden bear standing outside of his window.
Never
the
played
boy
it,
was
so I don't know.
racked with guilt.
They
he
are
was
making a
convinced
VR
that he
game
was
of it.
being haunted by the ghost of his brother stuck
That's cool.
inside the suit that took his life. The suit's three-toed feet digging into the wet earth. The words "It's me" ringing through Michael's ears. Some nights, Michael
makes
would
sense.
even go so far as to break out of his room to check the gravesite and ensure that his brother was still there. As for William himself, he disappeared into his work and his drinks. Junior's, the local bar, wasn't far from his son's gravesite. He found himself going there more and more frequently, spending longer and longer amounts of time there. The bar gave him a place to think, to remember, to reflect and stew on how Henry had stolen his idea for an animal-themed restaurant. How they'd cut his character out of the cartoon when everyone else was there. How Henry
who would
had
want that
humiliated him
creepy-ass
by
dude in
buying
the
him out of
cartoon?
bankruptcy. And now there was his son. Henry had taken his son from him. The robotic part was the part that failed after all. William ordered one more drink, but it was one too many. The bar turned him out and told him to go home. But William didn't go home. Drunk and angry, William raced back to the restaurant to give Henry a piece of his mind, only to find someone else waiting. Henry's daughter, Charlie, locked outside of the building, bullies laughing at her through the window. Fine, some other problem to fix. But then Afton got an idea, a beautifully awful idea. This was his chance to get back at the man that had humiliated him all those years ago. Henry had killed his business, and now Henry's robotic suit had killed his son. It was time for William to do some killing of his.
I think that might be a little. If William did not care about his kids, why would he have like cameras all over the place and like actually be drinking all the time? Wouldn't he just be thinking about like murdering, and like how to like doing experiments on bodies or whatever? I don't know.
Own. Let Henry feel what it's like to have something you love get ripped away. While parties continued inside the walls of the pizzeria, William attacked Charlie in the back alley. It felt good. He felt free. The years of resentment and bitterness trapped in his heart finally released in a moment of pure unapologetic evil. He would make Henry hurt like he hurts. And in that moment, William became a killer. He dropped Charlie's lifeless body and drove home, forced to confront his family problems
He did
later
do
that
that, yeah.
night.
I
Appalled,
think he did
but
that.
also a little
Why is it a
excited
purple
by
beetle,
what he had
though?
just done. Charlie's death would remain on the books as a random act of violence. And though Henry had suspicions about William, there was no physical evidence, nothing that could link him back to the crime. In the weeks that followed, Fredbear's family diner would close for good.
The movies
Two
are-
high-profile deaths
I only seen the
around
first
restaurant
movie,
with
and
two
it
grieving
completely
owners
it
in such a short
confused me
period of
pretty bad.
time. Was just too much bad
'Cause I
press to
never seen the
handle.
books.
Besides,
I
Freddy
never read the
Fazbear's
books.
was still open, and it was the newer restaurant anyway. All the equipment from the diner, including the old yellow suits and security puppet, would get retired
dude
to that
killing is
location.
crazy.
And there they would sit for 2 uneventful years. The rest of 1983 and 1984 were spent quietly grieving. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and the new cast of characters were a hit. Tragic memories of their yellow predecessors quickly faded. Afton kept a low profile and buried himself in work and research, quickly reaching
now
Henry's
he's
level
doing
of
that.
engineering and even surpassing him. And while Henry slowed down to grieve, Afton kept going, even starting his own company, Afton Robotics, for all those pet projects that were a little bit too experimental for the regular operations of the pizzeria. The first of these experimental projects was a secret workshop under his house, a veritable bunker, which allowed him to work while
that's
still monitoring his kids via
This part makes sense where he has his own place. It says, did you know that Scott wanted to make an actual Fnaf restaurant, but was scared that fans will kill children to yeah, I think I've seen that, which makes, and not even gonna lie, that makes total sense. Like, actually makes total sense, dude. Like, literally.
Hidden security cameras. One.
It just sucks that he actually has to think about that because it is like a possibility that somebody would do that.
983. A passcode that served as a constant reminder of why the cameras were so important. Why he was down there in the
Oh my
first
god, that's where his theories came?
place. This was all
Or
to
was that
fulfill the
edited?
promise that he had made to his son, right? I will put you back together. This was for him. All for him, right? But cameras weren't enough. He needed to solve the runaway Michael problem. He had to keep him in the house. He couldn't have another one of his kids wind up dead inside of an animatronic suit. So why not run a little experiment on Michael? You see, all this work with Henry had gotten Afton to start learning more about life, robots, the human mind, and what a fallible machine we as humans were. Our reality is so easy to manipulate with a few sensory deceptions. Deceptions like sound. With just a few sounds, he had discovered that he could alter a person's vision. He could transform blank, smooth plastic robots into lumbering, twisted nightmares. Nightmares far
I need to play
scarier
this
than
game.
he could
I need to play
create with
I need to play
actual
FNAF 4.
materials. They would appear
I feel like
organic,
I'll be better at that
rotting,
than Pizzeria.
putrid, terrifying. These would be his means of keeping his son Michael in the house where he belonged. Was it extreme? Maybe. But then again, this was the boy who had killed his son. He would make him sorry. And so Michael
Wait,
would
so
grow up not
Michael's
only
the
dealing
kid
with the
in the
memories of his
bed?
own guilt, the hospital room, the pills, the flowers, the death of his brother, but also facing literal nightmares, illusions created by sound. Michael would never forget these either. Years later, as a security guard, he would still draw pictures of them inside
Yes,
his logbook.
I did not
but
know
all
that.
of these extra projects
thought it
meant
was the
that his
kid.
home life suffered even more. He was an
The only reason I thought it was a kid because I thought when he got crushed and it's Michael's dream. Oh, I thought it was the other way around. I thought the kid was the one dreaming because he got freaking brain damage from the FNAF crunch.
absent father and a non-existent husband, leaving his wife cold and alone.
Why do you hide inside your walls?
She's a
when
never mind. I'm
there
not gonna
is
say anything.
music
Yeah, I also thought that.
in
Yeah.
my halls? All I see is an empty room.
How old is Ballora? Is she just a robot, or is she possessed? She's a robot. All right, all right.
No
'Cause I was gonna say something, but
joy, an empty
you have to make sure with the FNAF lore.
And despite her repeated demands that he leave his office and engage with the family, he refused time and time again, leaving her no choice but to leave.
You burned down my house?
You call that a house? It was like a morgue in there. You need to
Exotic
see your
butters.
son.
The baby isn't mine.
Well, how's this?
I think it's William's
I'm keeping
wife.
the diamond ring.
And through it all, there was
Not
one lingering
anymore.
feeling. William wasn't done. He had gotten a taste of what it felt like to be unleashed, what it felt like to be free. Charlie's murder had unlocked something in him, and he wanted more. June 26th, 1985. Putting on the golden Bonnie suit, he lured children one by one to the back room of the pizzeria when no one was looking. At
back
first, he
room?
was cautious. He would lure them with promises of cake and cookies. He told them that their dog had died. He would ask for help with homework. Susie was the first. You never truly forget your first. But where to hide the bodies? He couldn't
Ballora's
sneak out. Someone would see him. He had to hide them in a place where they'd never be found and where they'd
What
never
place
leave
is that?
the building. They had to be stuffed inside of the suits.
Oh.
No one maintained those things anyway except for him. And so Susie would go into Chica.
Where
Fritz,
does the black
Jeremy, and
magic
Gabriel would
come in play?
next, but it was easy.
Where does,
It was
like, the
too
frickin-
easy. And with each little life
Where does
he
the
snuffed out,
possession-
his lies got bigger.
frickin'
Their house was
scary-ass
burning.
stuff
They're
happened?
just being kidnapped until the last one where all
Secret of the Mimic? Really?
pretense was off. He let himself get violent. Too violent.
I'll just wait for him after school, throw a bag over his head, hit him with a shovel, and drag him into the back of my car.
The body of Cassidy was far more bloody and broken than any of the others. He'd let himself go too far. That one he shouldn't have killed. With no more active animatronics left, he shoved the body into the one suit that remained backstage. The long-forgotten yellow Fredbear.
And then
now
they make
broken
another
and
game,
discolored with age.
feel like.
Broken, like Cassidy
Extreme
was
Deep.
broken, like it was broken.
But
Newspapers
then it gets screwed.
reported on this disappearance, naming
The
the,
next-
whole
I
thing
think the
missing
next
children's
Mimic game
incident.
kinda-
Police would even charge
or the
William with
DLC
the crimes
kind of
after finding security footage of the
changes
golden
everything, I think.
mascot suit luring kids to the back, but they couldn't convict him. They had no bodies, and his face had been hidden behind the mascot suit the entire time. What they had was circumstantial
I want
at
pizza
best,
now.
and so he walked away a free man. But Henry knew the truth. In these murders, he saw his daughter Charlie all over again. So he threw Afton out of the company and shuttered the doors to the old pizzeria. Henry would keep the franchise quiet for 2 years. This would not happen again. This could not happen again. How could he protect the kids? Finally, he developed a solution. He would implement an even more extreme security system in the form of new
Is this a fucked up hot take? Henry's not a good person.
Toy animatronics, inspired by the toys that they had been selling years ago. But these guys, these were special. They were a new breed of robot with facial recognition abilities.
But most importantly, they're all tied into some kind of criminal database, so they can detect a predator a mile away.
All the original animatronics.
I feel like Henry isn't a good person.
Now like with age were moved to the new location. With a plan in place, it was time to
gotta keep the kids safe. Let me remake the fucking models. Let me remake the animatronics that already screwed everything.
Try once more. The year was 1987, and the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was making headlines in local newspapers. Headlines that just so happened to catch the attention of William Afton. Freddy's was back, and without
I don't want to say anything
that
because that
was
hasn't
his
happened.
idea.
I feel
his
like the thing that you try to do.
Henry was yet again trying to cut him out of the picture. No, as long as these restaurants stayed open, William would always come back. Then he noticed the phone number to apply at the bottom.
That's the shit I hear before I get jump scared by
to apply call.
Scrap trap.
Afton would go back, not as an owner or co-founder. He would go back in the one place that they would least suspect him, a lowly day shift security guard. And there it was, buried in the back of parts and services, mixed in with the old withered animatronics, was the golden rabbit. With the yellow security badge still on his chest, he used his crank to pull open the spring locks. It was time for Bonnie to give an encore performance.
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right. From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available.
1987, 5 more kids. He didn't know what felt better, getting back into the suit after 2 long years of waiting, or knowing how devastating this would be to Henry the next morning. He didn't even try to hide his crime this time, just meant more blood on Henry's hands. He'd failed to protect the kids again. The restaurant had only been open for a few weeks, but William was sure that this would get it to close. Good, if he couldn't have Freddy's, no one would. Whenever a new pizzeria opened, he would be there. But as he sat in his bunkers,
why didn't Henry just report
William's mind? He had seen something strange. The old withered animatronics, they had been wandering around the building, spurred on by the puppet. It was almost like those old robots were trying to save the kids. Save them? They couldn't, obviously, but still, how were they moving? It was almost like they had been given life somehow. Did he have something to do with that? The following day, the news would report a security guard getting bitten by one of the animatronics during the day shift. Was that bite meant for him? William's curiosity was stronger now than his bloodlust. He had to learn more, but how? There was no way he'd ever be able to get inside another Freddy's pizzeria. Heck, there was practically no way a Freddy's would ever open again. He needed to create something new, something brand new. He needed to create his own pizzeria.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
Circus Baby's Pizza World. This would be the place where he could continue his work. No longer just murdering, experimenting. He needed more kids, and he needed them alive. And knowing that he couldn't show his face on the restaurant floor, he needed a way of remotely capturing his victims and preserving them for his work. With that goal in mind, he designed a new breed of animatronic. Their endoskeletons fluid and flexible. He equipped them with sound lures that could mimic voices. They could isolate children. They could incapacitate and contain them with zero direct input from him. It was brilliant. He was brilliant. Far beyond the simple bars and wires.
I did not know he made like killing machines for children.
And the characters he chose for this were uniquely his. His new roster wasn't going to be tainted by Henry's disgusting barnyard bird. Instead, it was back to his characters, his creations, Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, as well as 2 special ones. The first, Ballora, was an homage to the woman who left him. Now she would never leave him again. The second, the titular baby, was designed with his baby in mind, Elizabeth, his youngest child. She would always be Daddy's
was
little
Elizabeth.
girl, the one that listened to him, the one that obeyed until the day that she didn't.
Daddy, why won't you let me play with her? She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
The day before Circus Baby's Pizza World opened, she disobeyed. She didn't listen.
It was Circus Baby before.
The animatronic ripped in half and swallowed her whole. A scared and confused child faded
that one actually makes sense.
Eternal darkness. By the time
that one makes sense.
Her, it was too late.
Her death makes a lot of sense. So he made them just I think he did. He made them have sound cues and like basically make them act, like have like really fluid motion, I guess.
He's under the guise of a gas leak. But wait, as he sat there at
Like,
the foot of the stage, he noticed that something was different. The eye color of the robot had changed. Baby had been built with blue eyes, but now they were emerald green, the same color as Elizabeth's. Was she in there? Could this all be connected to the free-moving animatronics that he had seen at Freddy's?
Yeah.
He had to know more. His mourning turned to excitement. He had to return to where it all started. 1993. Pathetic. This place was pathetic. Henry had clearly tried to reopen one final time with those
Fnaf
old
2.
original
They still
animatronics
see
from
in
so
Square,
long
but
ago,
yeah, they
but
did.
Williams' damage to the brand had been
But
permanent. These things
not the
stank of
children,
death. They had
only
been
the
washed in
freaking,
decades.
only the
But
security
even if
guard.
they had, nothing could wash away the stink of murder that haunted these halls. One night,
Which
then
makes sense. It
another,
was like a
then
revenge
another.
type of
William
thing.
repeatedly snuck into the old, broken restaurant to lure the living animatronics to him, one by one dismantling them, robbing them of their endoskeletons. The metal had to be the secret. It had to contain the remnants of life itself. But he had to know for sure. Leaping out of a room that was invisible to the animatronics programming, he dragged the oversized robotic skeletons back to his underground workshop, back to where Circus Baby watched on with glowing, curious eyes.
The
Eyes
scooper?
that somehow felt alive. Not knowing what else to do, William melted the robotic parts down. 5 animatronic endoskeletons reduced down to one silvery puddle of goo. Could he transfer this living metal to his own creations? He had to try. He picked up a syringe and filled it with the molten metal and injected the goo into Funtime Freddy's twisted, wiry endoskeleton. And suddenly the coils came to life, like snakes writhing in a pile. What had once been cold, lifeless metal moved and jolted on its own. He'd done it. He had unlocked the secret to life itself. Except something was clearly wrong. The movements were erratic. They were violent,
That's
angry.
crazy.
Baby didn't act this way. She had been calm, collected. This was clearly something else, something mindless and frantic. Perhaps by mixing the souls and then portioning them out, he had created incomplete beasts. He would need to keep testing to truly understand it. He needed more of this remnant. As he searched the old pizzeria one more time for any remaining scraps of metal, the ghosts attacked. His past victims come to collect their due, all led by Cassidy. The 5 lined up and blocked the door, and Afton's mind reeled. The scientific implications of this were incredible. Ghosts, real ghosts that he could see, all standing against him. But what could they do? What couldn't they do? He panicked as Cassidy approached. How do you stop something that's already dead? Maybe with the thing that resulted in their death in the first place. He would get into his suit like old times. He would regain his power over them just like the day that they died. He was the genius. He was the one in the suit. He was the one in charge. The spring lock snapped into place. Maybe it was his frantic movements. Maybe it was the leaky abandoned restaurant. Maybe it was just fate coming to collect its due. He didn't know. The only thing he did know was that his brain was suddenly filled with searing white-hot pain as hundreds of metallic pins and gears stabbed into his body from all sides. All he could do was collapse, blood slowly oozing out of the suit and pooling onto the floor around him. It couldn't end like this. It wouldn't end like this. His work was unfinished.
Oh, because he dies in that suit. He basically just comes back like a normal dude.
Living. It took days lying in his own blood, but eventually someone found him. A security guard making a normal report. When he saw the animatronics torn apart in the middle of the party room floor, it caused him to file an immediate report of a break-in. An owner would have to come in and claim the damage. And who else would it be other than Henry? Hope jumped in Afton's heart. Henry would see him. They were partners after all. He would be the one to help save him, to get him out of this suit, to relieve him from this tremendous pain. Henry entered the secret room. His eyes fell on Afton sitting there in the pool of red, and Henry, saying nothing, turned and walked away.
This is just to inform all employees that due to budget restrictions, previously mentioned safe rooms are being sealed at most locations, including this one. Nothing is being taken out beforehand, so if you left anything inside, then it's your own fault. Management also requests that this room not be mentioned to family, friends, or insurance representatives.
And so there Afton would sit, hanging on
So Henry's
for 30
Henry's
years,
gonna let him
trapped
back.
behind the walls with an iron will that refused to die. End of this part. I say this part because it's not officially the end of the Afton era just yet, but this just felt like a really solid stopping point, and the episode has gone on forever. Okay, so most of this is things that we already knew, stuff that's been established and reestablished time and time again by the games. That said, there are 2 things that I absolutely have to address. The first and biggest is the placement of sister location, or more specifically,
placement of sister location is
death.
fucked.
To me, evidence in game seems to suggest that it was meant to come before the crying child's death in 1983. The biggest clue to this is that the crying child saw something. Remember what you saw is the phrase that's repeated over and over again by psychic friend Fredbear, aka William Afton speaking through a walkie-talkie in the Fredbear plushie's stomach. But what did he see? Well, I think we can tell based on how the nightmare animatronics are visualized. They have mouths in their stomachs, just like Baby ripping in half at the waist to swallow a kid. There's also the empty girl's room, one presumably left behind by a dead sister. And lastly, it explains why he's scared, and more specifically, why Afton wants him scared. He needs his kids to stay away from the animatronics.
That's what I was gonna say. He needs his kids to stay away from the animatronics.
Because the last time one of his kids got too close to a robot, his daughter died. That's then why he sets up the nightmares, to scare both Mike and the crying child away from the animatronics from that point forward. That's why books like the Character Encyclopedia outright suggest that we play as the crying child in Fnaf 4. That's why he has a nanny cam following the crying child everywhere, so he can keep tabs on his kids when they're out of his sight. He can't let another Elizabeth situation happen. The death of Elizabeth also gives William Afton extra motivation for killing. He's a grieving father. His daughter was taken away from him, so Charlie should die as well. He's lashing out at the world after losing his kids. And again, we know that at least one of his children had to have died prior to Charlie's death, based on the mound of dirt that we see in Midnight Motorist. It also allows circus babies to open and close earlier in the timeline, which is how you wind up with Funtime Foxy appearing as Mangle in the FNAF 2 location. Basically, Elizabeth dying first has everything it needs to fit, except for the most important thing, the murder weapon. Why would Afton be building an animatronic with a giant claw in its stomach so early in the timeline? At this point, he just has no motive. It just doesn't make sense prior to 1983. At this point in the story, he hasn't killed anyone, and we know for a fact that the missing children's incident is 1985. So Elizabeth's death coming before any of those events just doesn't work, hence why I placed it where I did in the narrative timeline. Afton's death here is also a bit tricky. We know that he returned to the FNAF 1 location to break down the original animatronics in order to harvest their remnant. We know that he melts down 5 things to become one thing. Candy Cadet makes that very clear. So the 5 things are the 5 endoskeletons from the various animatronics. That would be totally fine if it weren't for one huge problem. On his 5th visit to the pizzeria, Afton gets spring locked. So either the 5 becoming 1 starts in 1993, but then finishes 30 years later when he reemerges from the wall to add the last endoskeleton to his pile, or he's had himself some reason to return to the original location after harvesting all the stuff that he can. It's not ideal, but it's the one angle that makes the most sense. And with that, this next chapter comes to a close, thereby leaving us with 5 more games to cover and another 40 plus years of Fazbear history to recap. Ooh, when you put it that way, something tells me that this might balloon into 4 parts. Ugh, we'll see. Welcome to Game Theory and page 20 of our final FNAF timeline. This is getting ridiculous. Last time we covered William Afton's rise as a serial killer, how the loss of his young son in 1983 caused him to make one fateful promise that would ultimately serve as his driving force for decades. I will put you back together. Fueled by grief and obsession, Afton would lose himself in work and drinks. One night in a fit of rage, he lashes out against Henry's young daughter Charlie, his first murder. This moment becomes the first domino to fall in a long sequence of events that ultimately destroys William's life and the lives of those around him. That one murder gives Afton a taste for blood, resulting in the deaths of 10 more children across 2 different pizzerias. Those children go on to possess animatronics, giving Afton his first exposure to Remnant and the potential solution for bringing his son back to life. The need to learn more about this miraculous power leads him to produce the Funtime animatronics, as well as their capture devices, robots designed to bring kids to him for experimentation and collection of more Remnant. Except there was one thing that he didn't account for: his daughter's curiosity. He made the robots too appealing, and it would cost him Elizabeth's life. Now with 2 children to put back together, Afton was more desperate and crazed than ever, returning to defunct pizzerias to steal the possessed metal still living inside their walls. What he didn't account for, though, were the ghosts, forcing him to pay for the sins of his past. When last we left him, William was spring-locked, bleeding to death behind a secret wall. Gone, but certainly not forgotten, as we're about to see in today's video. Today, we're finishing up Chapter 2 of our story, wrapping up the Afton era. Over the next 6 pages, we switch our focus to the other main character of the franchise, Mike, a young boy dealing with the fallout of a stupid childhood decision with tragic consequences. A young man whose life is best described as collateral damage, caught in the blast radius of William's whirlwind of destruction. Now, before we begin, let me just rip off the band-aid now. We won't be finishing the timeline today. I know. I'm sorry, I wanted to, but covering FNAF VR, AR, and Security Breach wound up taking me an additional 9 pages of script, and I've already already made you wait long enough for this part, so I just had to make the executive call to break this one up into 2. Don't worry, that part is already written, it is already recorded, it is just in the process of being edited. It is a hefty episode. So mark it on your calendar, that one's actually going to be going live on March 25th. It's also coming complete with a live talk back where we go back over everything from the past couple episodes, as well as having ourselves some very special guests. So overall, that one should be a lot of fun. Fair warning though, the conclusions we've reached that solve security breach, they are controversial. I feel good about them. Like, I think that we've locked in on a lot of the answers here, but they're gonna raise a lot of discussion. Let's just say that you're either gonna love that episode or hate it. I don't really think there's gonna be much in between on that one. Anyway, without any further ado, let's cover a chunk of the timeline that's a lot less controversial. Let's meet Mike.
I always like that. I always like that sound effect.
Michael knew his father sometimes traveled for work, disappearing for days on end, but usually there was some sort of notice, a phone call, a post-it, something. It's not like Michael and his father were close, far from it. But as a household of 2 suffering men coping with years of tragedy and loss, there was at least some element of communication between the 2 of them. They were united by a name and a shared pain. This time though, things felt different. William had left nothing. His absence was longer. There were no check-ins, no updates, just silence.
Oh, it's because he's in the freaking...
happened. If there was one thing Michael knew about his father, it was that he had contingencies, safety checks, backup plans. His father was a careful and guarded man. He held his cards close to his chest, and as such, William had prepared him in the event that something like this ever happened. Normally, his father kept his home office locked, but in the event of an unexpected, prolonged absence, Michael had been instructed to enter his father's office and look behind an empty set of shelves mounted in the corner of the room. Rolling his eyes, Michael entered the office. He never fully understood how William was able to spend so many hours of his days locked up in here. There was just nothing to do. Most of this place was empty. He dragged himself over to the shelf in the corner,
why does Springtrap want to kill you in Fnaf 3 then?
Family safety deposit box. But what he actually found there was completely unexpected.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be.
The shelf swung open and revealed a giant industrial
God.
One that led straight down into an underground bunker. But that was impossible.
Hidden
inside his childhood home was a secret entrance to an enormous underground science lair? It didn't make any sense. Seriously, it didn't make any sense. And yet, here it was, mapped directly underneath the floor plan of the house that he'd grown up in, lost his brother in, been tortured in. Michael thought that he'd known his father, a prideful, sad, angry man with petty everyday problems, but clearly he'd been
I always thought I thought Sister Location was like literally earlier.
Suddenly the days of William being locked inside of his office made sense. He'd been here the entire time. Where was here though? Was this Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals? The Circus Baby restaurant always
and
did
that's why everybody wants
personal project for father. A failure of his that cut unusually deep.
But then that also doesn't make it doesn't really make sense now that I think about it.
Due to the gas leaks. After that day, father really did seem to change, to lose himself.
And in Sister Location,
clearly the entrance he had found was some sort of
in Sister Location
facility, one that required
2 people
through vents to navigate.
do something for themselves, and you see that, which are workers.
And that's when he found her. At the end of the
how would Michael not find out that he's got 2?
Except
how would Michael not see that
wasn't like the others.
There's 2 random strangers just going to the house?
This wasn't just a robot. She was alive.
What are we gonna say with that?
And not only was she alive, she also felt familiar.
There is something bad inside of me. I'm broken. I can't be fixed. Will you help me?
Was this his sister? William's baby girl? But how? Why? What was this place? He dug around some old files and found blueprints outlining the features of these animatronics. Storage containers, voice mimicking, parental tracking. And was that a child in Freddy's stomach? Was his father collecting and experimenting on kids? Were all the rumors that he'd heard throughout his past actually true? That the animatronics came to life at night? That there were murders done in all the pizzerias? That his father had somehow been the prime suspect in all of it? Suddenly, Michael's mind flashed back to his persistent nightmares throughout his childhood. Had he been experimented on too? Tears stung in his eyes as anger, fear, and confusion filled his body. His father's secrets were pouring out. William wasn't just a lame, overworked father. He was a monster, toying with life itself. Suddenly, everything clicked. He frantically looked around the room, blinking human heads on poles staring back at him. Green eyes, his sister. Blue eyes, his brother. Closed eyes, his mom. All just staring expectantly. These were meant to be human. William was working down here trying to make believable humans, literally rebuilding the family that they had both lost. The small little girl robots with their British accents roaming the hallways of this underground facility suddenly took on a whole new context.
Hello in there.
He was trying to make freaking humans.
Were those meant to be his sister? A replacement for her? A clone? Was William building clones of his sister? They seemed to know him, after all, to react to his presence.
They were all there.
Yeah, but he always comes back though.
They recognized me at first, but then they thought I was you.
He always did have a bit of a resemblance to his father. Michael's mind reeled as the reality of his world crumbled to dust. No, he had to get them out of there. If this really was his sister, heck, if any of these things were human, souls, whatever remnant of the humans that they once were, they needed to be rescued.
They always put us back inside. There's nowhere for us to hide here.
Led by the voice of Circus Baby, he marched through the now empty halls of the Funtime Auditorium. He would lead them. He would protect them. And finally, he would be able to forgive himself for the killing of his brother so many years.
Yep.
You are in the scooping room.
He ends up getting tricked, right?
The scooper only hurts for a moment.
Scooper? That violent extraction arm? Michael had seen that one in the pile of blueprints. Something about heat rendering the magical silver metal inside useless. In reality, prior to getting himself spring-locked and put behind the wall, William's methods had become increasingly sophisticated, with a mechanized arm that could infuse new bodies with a soul. William could finally give and take away life. The only thing he needed were the bodies.
Yep.
But William wasn't the only one looking for bodies, as Michael was about to learn.
But if we looked like you, then we could hide. If we looked like you, then we would have somewhere to go.
Michael was going to be the hero to help these animatronics, all right. He was going to help the haunted tubes and wires of these animatronics escape, just not in the way that he anticipated. His sister had lied to him, another game of pretend. The scooper plowed forward, digging its extraction arm into his body. As he heard his bones ripping through his flesh, Michael blacked out.
But something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not.
Uh-oh.
For the next several months, Michael's life was not his own. He was forced to comply with the tangle of wires and spirits that lived inside of him. His body felt like an overfilled balloon begging to burst as day by day, week by week, his flesh began to sag and discolor. He was a walking, talking, rotting corpse, alive, but wishing he wasn't. He was a puppet, a walking shell. Although he did his best to conceal his fate, there was only so much a man filled with robot spaghetti could do. The entity in his innards would eventually leave.
Dying.
But by that point, the damage had been
he
done.
comes back.
His decaying flesh stank, turning him into a literal purple guy. But still, even with no bones, even with rotting purple flesh and begging to die, Michael continued to live. That silvery metal remnant injected by the scooper meant that he couldn't die. His anger also refused to die. What he had seen down there in his sister's location had rocked him to his core. His father had killed and captured dozens. His experiments had killed his sister and then tortured him throughout all his childhood. He was actively trying to build human replicants. He didn't know where his father was, but Michael knew that he was out there somewhere.
He's literally just dying.
In shadows. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you.
Michael had to correct for the sins of his father. He had to make things right. Michael would burn Fazbear Entertainment to the ground. I mean, what else could you do when your skin was permanently purple? Michael's strategy was simple. He would apply for night security guard positions at the old defunct pizzeria locations. That way, no one ever had to see him or smell him during his shift. And all these old, shuttered locations did need guards. Teenage vandals and squatters were always looking to get inside these abandoned buildings, and yet no one ever really wanted to work an overnight graveyard shift unless they were practically out of options. Enter Mike. One by one, he would take on the job of security guard, changing his name each time to ensure that no one was able to follow his paper trail. Once inside, he could tamper with the animatronics and figure out how they worked, writing about his experiences in his security logbook.
Is that where Helwana comes to play?
Upper management awkwardly welcomed new
wait, no,
Helwana's
just
jobs, even though he was working there nowhere near the summer months. He heard the gory details of his father's franchise from the outsiders looking in, confused and afraid about what was happening in the walls around them. Sometimes he would see his brother in the form of the Golden Freddy suit. It's me appearing on the walls around him. Except now, there was something else there. He was no longer alone. Another angrier presence was also in the suit, as if two spirits were forced to share the same body. And Golden Freddy would attack him now. It was aggressive. Its vengeance wanted to lash out at anyone with the Afton name, anyone who wore a security guard outfit. Over time, Mike worked his way through the old restaurants, the original pizzeria, the bigger, better Freddy Fazbear's. He spent weeks there looking for clues as to his father's whereabouts, and each time at the end of his week shift, he would then set the location on fire. Remnant can't survive high temperatures after all. So
would he do that? Would he actually burn the places after a week of working there? I think he would burn it. I think he would burn places because
animatronics that still existed
the
inside seemed like
animatronics just
all this
dip out, right?
Of his past, though, was causing the nightmares to begin.
That's where you get him.
Hallucinations that brought him back to his childhood. The guilt around killing his brother. His dreams were oddly mixed with the shrill phone calls of the security guards. But it would all be worth it in the end. The goal was to eventually stumble across the one location, the one job that would finally reunite him with his father. Little did Mike know that day would come sooner than he expected. 2023, an advertisement came across Mike's TV. Fazbear Frights, a new horror attraction inspired by the awful crimes that occurred around Freddy Fazbear's Pizza so many years ago. It made Mike sick.
Where
People
is
looking to make a quick
Frights?
buck off the tragedy of others, off his own family. This wasn't a joke or entertainment. Regardless, he had to be a part of it. If this team was combing through his family's history, they might stumble across something that could be useful. And if his father was truly still alive as he suspected, there would be no way that he wouldn't show up here. Maybe finally this could be the final chapter in his family's marathon of tragedy. Mike applied for the job and was immediately handed the keys. Years of doing this had taught him that security guards rarely receive thorough security checks. They also liked how creepy
Fnaf
Mike
3.
looked. They thought it was a costume.
I just don't know like what
for the
exact
job.
location.
What little they knew.
Hey, glad you came back for another night. I promise it'll be a lot more interesting this time.
For weeks, there was nothing. But just as Mike considered giving up, he received the call that he'd been waiting for years.
You're not gonna believe this. We found one. A real one.
Could this finally be him? Sure enough, there he was. William inside his iconic golden Bonnie Springlock suit. Only now it was green and decaying with age. And there they were, a small family of
But why does it stay there for the whole week?
Reunited. It's been a long time, Dad. Mike had always struggled with the phantoms of his past haunting him, but now all the animatronics he'd encountered over the past months, hopping from pizzeria to pizzeria, suddenly sprang to life. Their burned faces haunting him as he tried to keep track of his father on the cameras. It would seem that William's mere presence had put the spirits on
I like how it goes.
alert.
I like how it goes full circle. That now he's watching his dad in the camera instead of the opposite. A really cool thing.
Ultimately, they were harmless, more annoying than anything else. But there was one that felt different from the others. One that was more than just a mere phantom. The security puppet. If he looked at the cameras at just the right moment, he could see it floating there through the halls. He could even see its reflection in the water pooled on the ground. It would seem like he wasn't the only one there on a mission. While he was dealing with Springtrap, Michael assumed that this one was likely dealing with the spirits of this place, finally setting them to rest. Hopefully this means a happier day for all of us, Mike thought to himself. And in that moment, he felt the air around him release, like pressure being let out of a bottle. The building sighed, as if 5 spirits had finally been allowed to move on. He had the sense that his brother was a part of them. He rigged the wiring inside the building to misfire, and the dry, desiccated walls erupted in flames. It is finished. Except, it was not. Somehow, through sheer force of will, Afton remained. He had survived, and Mike would need to find a new way of finishing off his father. Luckily, the solution would present itself later that year. Not from Mike, but from another victim that had been left in his father's wake.
We're talking about becoming a Fazbear Entertainment franchisee. Restaurant ownership and management. Something almost anyone can do with a limited degree of success. You are now the face of the newly rebranded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Fazbear Entertainment as a brand had been closed for years. William had been stuck in a suit and a wall. The only person who legally could bring the franchise back was Henry, but he largely pulled out of the franchise around the time of his father's disappearance. Something was up. Surely this had to be some kind of a trick, right? Mike, doing what he did best, applied for a franchise and immediately got the job. There was just one thing out of the ordinary. Paragraph 4.
If you are playing this tape, that means that not only have you been checking outside at the end of every shift, as you were instructed to do, but also that you have found something that meets the criteria of your special obligations under paragraph 4.
No employment contract he'd ever signed required him to keep special lookout for independently moving animatronics outside the restaurant. Now he knew something was up here. Henry was luring them all back. Rather than trying to go to them, like Mike had done for years, Henry was doing the opposite. He was putting them all under the same roof. He was finishing them off for good. Mike knew this wasn't meant to be a restaurant. It was meant to be a prison, a containment vessel, a locked box meant to trap them all in so they could finally end the madness. It took a few nights, but eventually everyone was there. His father, the puppet, the robot Spaghetti that had once violated his body, and his sister, now hopelessly devoted to serve the man that had once gotten her killed. It was time. He had been instructed to seal the doors and leave, but while he locked everything down, he didn't move on. If this was truly meant to be the end, if the remnant needed to be washed away, he needed to be a part of that.
This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still. and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, old friend.
And with that, it was over. The Afton legacy died with all of them trapped inside of a literal
then that doesn't even work.
As the flames danced around the office, Mike, for the first time in decades, was happy. But William wasn't gone yet. Although the darkest pit of hell was open and waiting for him, something or someone wouldn't allow him to move on. Instead, he found himself locked in moments from his past. The pizzeria,
is he gonna
Son's room, his underground bunker.
He's gonna
It was
talk.
as if his brain's
Forgot he
neurons
talks
were all
about
firing at once, overloaded, mixing and matching all his
what's
biggest
that?
fears,
Ultimate Custom Night,
regrets,
where
failures. What was this place? How did
he says
get
it's
here?
hell,
He
right?
called out into the silence. Then they started coming. Without warning, animatronics, both new and old, began to jump out at him, bite him, rip him limb from limb. The pain was immeasurable. Make it stop. Make it stop. William, for the first time, longed for death, an end to this torture. Just as it felt like he couldn't take it anymore, everything was quiet again. It was as if the world had been reset. There was a brief moment of quiet, and then the onslaught began again. Dozens of faces from his past, all focused.
Wait a minute. So this is the Ultimate Custom Night lore. Why is he imagining anime FNAF characters?
On him. A waking nightmare that he couldn't escape from. More pain, more ripping. It was his own personal
And they're
hell,
speaking.
but why?
I'm pretty sure they speak like Japanese, right? Am I mistaken? Or they speak a different language, and it's like, what the
Why
heck?
couldn't he just die? And then he saw them, a group of characters he never thought he'd see again. Those janky, stolen characters that had started everything. The mediocre melodies. It had all started to go wrong once they showed up. Once Henry had made them. But mixed in with their obnoxious southern drawls, William heard something else. It was barely a whisper, but he could just make out the words.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
That voice. He knew that voice, but from where?
Greetings from the fire. The one you should not have killed.
The one he shouldn't have killed. William thought back. He'd done a lot of awful things, but there was always the one that stood out.
Oh, he
not
killed
Charlie, his drunken
he killed
act of
somebody
revenge,
that
not
was
Susie,
killed,
his
right?
first true
Explain
murder.
it.
No. Instead, it was the one that he had lost control with. The one that he had broken beyond repair for no good reason other than because he could. The one that he'd stuffed inside the golden bear that his partner used to wear. Cassidy. They were back, and now they were trying to punish him, to make him suffer like he'd made them suffer. It was almost like William and Cassidy's souls had been locked together, fused by a collective rage and spite, each refusing to move on. But while Cassidy was so focused on taking revenge, they actually did the one thing that would be the downfall for so many others. They kept William alive. Even though fire should have destroyed the remnant that was coursing through his being, Cassidy kept William breathing, paving the way for his escape. William's will was so strong, his soul so powerful that he managed to put a part of himself inside the circuitry that housed the spring-locked suit. And there, his consciousness lay, inside a single circuit board, waiting for someone to find him and set him free. A person that no one would suspect.
That makes a lot.
So a bit of a shorter
He's
chunk,
gonna
but an
freaking
important one as we
bring
shift
the
perspectives to
Hellwanted
Mike
shit
and tell his
too,
side of the
right?
story. And with FNAF VR, AR, and Security Breach having so much to explain, I didn't want to rush through things by trying to cram it all in here. Don't worry, I know you've all been patient. The final video is happening on March 25th. That is locked. It is getting ready to go. Trust me, I want this thing to be over and done with as much as you. I am not just stretching it out for the views. But before we wrap up for the day, I did want to talk about the big Orville elephant in the room, Mike's quest for revenge. You might have noticed that I was vague about the dates, and there's a good reason for that. I don't know him. There is no good way for me to make him fit in. Here's what I do know. We know with a high amount of certainty that Michael Afton is the character that we play as up until Ultimate Custom Night.
Because they talk about the smell, right?
Security guards for FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 respectively get fired for, quote, tampering with the animatronics
and odor.
So
Yeah.
weird connection between the two of them, right? But now, look at the phantom animatronics that are haunting us in FNAF 3. They use models from both FNAF 1.
He didn't explain the people that are in the basement.
1 and FNAF 2, meaning whoever is sitting in that security guard chair
he didn't
Fazbear
explain
Frights,
that.
they have to have seen both locations and their animatronics. And that's not all. Their designs are burnt. It's a weird detail in the game, and it's something that the character encyclopedia repeatedly calls attention to. The burned texture for these phantom animatronics. Why is that so unusual though? Fazbear Frights is the first time in the franchise that we hear about anything burning down. From that point on in the story, it's like the characters turn pyro and are suddenly setting fires left and right. But for the first 3 games, nothing ever catches fire. The animatronics animatronics are just moved or repurposed in some way. So when did they burn? And why would our security guards see them as being burned? Someone has to have been going location to location, setting these places on fire, purging the sins of the past. We know we're definitely playing as Mike and Sister Location in FNAF 6 based on the in-game dialogue. And in FNAF 4, there's
what if it was William burning them up?
We can hear the phone call from night 1 of FNAF 1, meaning that whoever's in that bedroom has heard the recording as a security guard. We also know that Mike has seen the nightmare animatronics based on his drawings in the security logbook. So overall, there is solid evidence that connects all of FNAFs 1 through 6. You'll also notice how the character encyclopedia doesn't have a page for Mike Afton. This thing has a page for Chocolate Bunny Bonnie, but not Michael. Some tells me they don't want us to confirm how many games he's been in, because that would confirm too much of the theory. In short, this gives us an incredibly compelling and complete narrative. Mike as our protagonist, and William, his father, as our antagonist. Mike accidentally kills his brother in Fredbear's mouth, which begins our story and sets William down his pathway of destruction. Mike is then haunted by the guilt of his past and is looking to make things right across the rest of the games. In Sister Location, he learns what his father's been up to and realizes what he has to do to correct it. After failing to finish the job in FNAF 3, he ultimately helps Henry end it all in FNAF 6. It is great. It is a clean narrative. There is just one problem: timing. Mike's quest can't really start until he's been down to Sister Location, seen Baby, and gotten himself scooped. That's when he finds out about Afton's secret life. It's also when he's gonna start to smell, because, you know, he's a walking, talking, rotting corpse. And we know that he's not going down into the bunker until the Funtime animatronics have been made, Freddy's has been closed, and Afton is out of the picture. That all should be happening post-1993, after William is sealed behind a wall. But that then presents us with a few problems. Afton has already dismantled the original animatronics as we see in the FNAF 3 minigames. How are those things getting burned if they're already deconstructed? But more importantly, we see FNAF 2 paychecks with the date 1987. That is way earlier than I think it can be. To be fair, Fritz Smith's pink slip on night 7 doesn't have a date, but it's a bit weird to say that the first few nights are in 1987 and then employee number 3 is hired on years after the restaurant closes. Anyway, just wanted to call that out because I don't have a solid answer for it, and I'd love to see your comments down below. And with that, my friends, this chapter comes to a close. We'll see you on March 25th for the grand finale as we cover the final 3 games in the franchise and the controversial answers we think solves what those games were trying to tell us. Until then, my Faz heads, remember, even though Afton kinda succeeded in being brought back to life, gotta admit, he's still looking a little bit on the dry, dehydrated side. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, and the final part of my FNAF timeline, where today, we're bringing our story to a close by talking about the most complicated and controversial part of the timeline, the part that I've been dreading most of all, the end. The moment where we're finally forced to come to some definitive and difficult answers trying to explain what the heck we were watching in Security Breach. The last 2 episodes have been about death. The death of Afton's family, the deaths of multiple children, the death of the franchise itself as Mike and Henry figuratively and literally burn it all down. Today's episode, though, and the current end of this franchise, is instead all about rebirth, the return of old characters in new forms, and the controversial rebirth of a franchise entering the next era of its story. But before we hop into the timeline, due to scheduling conflicts, I won't be able to have any live talk back after this episode. I know, I promised one, I was really excited about it, but I just couldn't make it work with my schedule and all the other guests' schedules. That said, I still do plan on doing one over the coming weeks with special guests. Just make sure that you're subscribed and either have all notifications turned on, or you're just watching our community tab for the announcement as to when that's gonna happen. And now, without any further ado, we finally reach the end and a new beginning to our story.
Post purple guy.
Fazbear Entertainment was dead.
There is no need for you to return to work next week, as Fazbear Entertainment is no longer a corporate entity.
All debts had been paid, all assets redistributed. The company was outright dissolved. Even the memories of the horrors that had happened there started to fade away in the public consciousness. The people were gone too. William was dead. Henry was gone. A whole generation of young Emilys and Aftons had lost their lives to the horrors of the pizzeria. All of them collateral damage to the man.
Ice cream.
Everyone the company had ever touched was dead and gone. Well, all except one.
Pay your child support, you deadbeats! I'm keeping the diamond ring. I also set the house on fire!
Clara Afton. She'd been there in the early days, back when things with William were good. They'd had the perfect home, a thriving business, the ideal family. But shortly after their youngest son died, things started to change. William had become distant, lost in his work, obsessive. She had watched him change from this irritatingly brilliant man that she had fallen in love with to a drunken monster struggling to hold himself together. And despite her trying to reach out to him in those desperate days, he was just too far gone.
admit it. You wanted to let me in.
For her sake, she had to leave the relationship. And from there, she largely faded into obscurity. A mystery from William's past. A footnote in his history. And that was fine for her. She wanted to leave that part of her life behind. She tried to move forward, never wanting to hear the name Freddy Fazbear again. A time defined by
When
mistakes
does she show back?
and broken
Or when does she come
promises.
back?
But then, the paperwork started to arrive. As Fazbear Entertainment began to close as a corporate entity, suddenly her mail was flooded with notifications, requests, obligations. She had been there since the beginning, helping William in the early days of his business, and now, as a shareholder and sole living member of the Afton family, all copyrights and trademarks of both Afton Robotics and Fazbear Entertainment passed on to her. Memories of this past life that she had long left behind. Looking at the blueprints, the contracts, the memos, she felt old wounds begin to reopen. The regrets of a happy family that had been torn away from her. William had always been brilliant. That's what had attracted her to him in the first place. But he'd also been too blinded by obsession and pride. He was too jealous, too petty, too unable to actually see a bigger picture. But now, holding
this
the
episode?
paperwork
Really?
contained decades of heartbreak and trauma.
This
she
all seems
realized
dark to
it was
me,
her turn.
if anything.
She was holding the power.
Maybe not.
This was her
Not
chance.
funny.
And one
Very
thought
dark.
resonated in her head. I will put them back together. I will put them all back together.
Wait, she's
she
putting
would be the one
them
to
back together?
rebuild this family. To rebuild the pieces of that shattered life.
Thought she was
to
talking about
reclaim
the
kids
animatronics.
that Fazbear had stolen from her. But how? Looking at William's work now laid out before her, she knew that he had been onto something. Collecting remnant, robotic humanoids, digital conscience transference. The pieces were all in place.
Wait,
They were
she
just
makes Help
scattered,
Wanted?
fragmented. It was almost like there were too many ideas going in too many different directions. It was such an important idea that she reiterated that point to herself.
the-
There were too many ideas going in too many different directions. That said, there had to be a way to save it all. She just needed to put it all back together. But how? To rebuild her family, she would first need to rebuild the franchise that had stolen them away from her. With ownership over the characters, their licenses, the technology patents, and the Fazbear name, she converted the corporation back to an LLC, a structure for smaller businesses that are usually family-owned. The irony was fitting. From there, she would need remnant, and lots of it. Remnant was the key. Clearly, in the later years of his life, William had been using Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals as a remnant farm, sending robots to kids' birthday parties in the hopes of nabbing bits of the stuff here and there. But clearly, it wasn't enough. He had, what, like 4, maybe 5 animatronics going out every week? No. It was a decent idea, but to get the remnant they required, it needed scale. Dozens, hundreds of animatronics all out there, all gathering remnant from unsuspecting customers. But to do that would require help, something William would never ask for. William had kept everything in-house. His obsession with control limited him. Clara, though, she wasn't nearly that precious. A plan like this required partners, people outside
so she
of
ends up
Fazbear to do the
she
heavy
ends
lifting.
up
So
I'm gonna take a good guess, but doesn't she end up like taking a whole different route where it's more like hypnotizing with the masks than actual remnant?
he contacted a mid-sized
Like more
delivery
modern
company,
stuff?
DLZ Shipping Solutions, to help build replicas of all the original animatronics. And with meal
Inside-
delivery apps being all the rage, why not an animatronic delivery service? Order one to celebrate your birthday, your Halloween party. How about a 4th of July picnic? We'll invite Liberty Chica and 4th of July Freddy on over. She would make sure that they made skins for every occasion. Chocolate Bonnies for Easter, Shamrock Freddies for St. Patrick's Day, Dia de los Muertos Chicas. And thus, the Fazbear Funtime service was born.
That's right. With the Fazbear Funtime service,
He got sponsored. Markiplier actually got sponsored to do that.
watching your back.
Was it ridiculous? Absolutely. Was it a sellout? Pff, no doubt. It was exactly the sort of thing that William would have hated, but it needed to be done to get enough remnant. Normally, the novelty of ordering an animatronic wore off after like
that actually
one,
makes
maybe 2 times.
a good amount of
So with
sense
new
that
skins for new
you
holidays, suddenly
hire
you had yourself an animatronic
animatronics to
perfect for
take
every
away your
occasion.
kids.
It would keep people hooked. It would keep them
They're
ordering the
supposed to
latest and
take away your
greatest that Fazbear Entertainment LLC had to offer. And all the while, they'd be collecting and returning the remnant back to her.
Yep.
In a word, it was brilliant. There was just one problem with it. No one trusted the Fazbear name. The
that
company's
makes
brand was still mud in the public eye. No one would want to hire animatronics from the restaurant franchise known for murdering children. Nothing kills a party quite like the threat of death, you know. So she needed to find a way to discredit the stories that had come before. She needed to win back the public's affections, reactivate some nostalgia for the spooky stories of their childhoods. She needed a game. Multiple games,
Help Wanted.
in fact.
They lied to us. They lied to all of us. They told us that the whole point of this VR game doing was to undo the bad PR done by a rogue indie game developer. But that's not true at all. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up.
Struggling game developers were a dime a dozen online, most working on their magnum opus between shifts at the Dollar General. So she found one. Steve just picked him out of obscurity, the right mix of desperate and doofus willing to say and do anything for a couple extra bucks. And he fell right in line.
Steve is supposed to be
delivering stupid little things with dumb generic names like Mangle's Quest, Balloon Boy's Air Adventure, Five Nights at Freddy's. Bad gameplay with even worse graphics, but hey, they got the job done. People were suddenly talking about the clues inside of these things, searching for the hidden lore. They were actively making jokes about dead kids at pizzerias. Her husband's twisted history of serial murder had suddenly been reduced to a mere Nancy Drew mystery to be solved. The plan had worked. Freddy Fazbear's was suddenly more popular than ever. Things were going shockingly well. Her takeover and reboot of the franchise was full and complete. Suddenly infused with cash, she built the largest, most ambitious project
I was about to say
the Mega Pizzaplex.
Yep,
William had always been so visionary, but always thought so small scale. He was careful to a fault. Not her, though. She knew that this latest project needed to be big. It needed to be flashy. It needed to be a palace for children. A place that got people talking and checking out the latest in Fazbear products. So with a steady supply of remnant flowing in, it was finally time. The stage was set. It was time to get to her real goal, literally rebuilding a family. March 2035. The first was obvious. The crying child, her little boy, the one that was the first to get ripped away from her. She'd seen down in his bunker that William had gotten very close to replicating artificial humans using animatronic technology, and so that's exactly what she would do. Rebuild her boy from the ground up using robotic parts. His shaggy brown hair, his favorite striped shirt, even down to small details that no one would notice, like the band-aid on his left knee. William's research had even found ways of making animatronics that could bleed and process food, making them virtually indistinguishable from a typical human. Never have any idea of what he actually was unless he was explicitly told. The only things that could possibly ruin the illusion were any overrides to his internal systems. If something were to, say, interfere with the cameras that he had in his eyes, or cause some sort of a core reboot to his hard drive, or x-ray bones, then yeah, he would be exposed, but otherwise, to the outside world, he was just your typical, normal human boy. She worked down in the bowels of the Pizzaplex giving him life, but it was one thing to build him, it was another to help him remember his identity. He died so young, so early in their history that there was no preserved memories for him, no documentation that she could just download into his digital brain. So bit by bit, she trained him, forcing him to remember who he was. In a corner of the room, she even made a makeshift dinner table, a reminder of their happier days. The family recreated two brothers,
this makes
a
sense.
sister, a father, and the mother at the head of the table. The one in charge, the one in command, the one bringing all of this to fruition. But his progress was admittedly slower than she would have liked. At first, he could only communicate through simple ones and zeros, then rudimentary drawings and crude letters. But bit by bit, images of his past life started to come through. Balloons, colors, houses, bears and faces, birthday parties. All for me. Gregory was alive. As the robot boy embraced her, she felt the warmth that she hadn't in decades. This was the joy that she'd been working towards. This was what it was all for. Her son, back in her arms again. The plan was working.
So why is he in a
Next
box?
was William. If the family was truly going to be put together, she would need him. And she knew exactly where he was, in the ruins of that old Freddy Fazbear's pizza place where Henry had trapped him. In fact, that's specifically why she insisted on building the Pizzaplex there over the sinkhole. It's the best place to hide what her true intentions were with the entire operation. Digging through the wreckage, she found him. He was right where she thought he'd be. Seeing the putrid shell of the Springtrap suit, though, was not something she was prepared for. The rotting corpse of William Afton was disgusting. Scorched flesh fused into the fur lining. Hollow black sockets where eyes once were. A smell that reeked of burned carbon and bloody iron. He was no longer flesh. It was just the tangled sinews of a creature that was once called human. How far this brilliant man had fallen. It was clear that her work was cut out for her on this one. Afton was practically lifeless. The man may not have been able to die, but he was about as close as you could come. And his body would need a lot of reconstruction. Replacement arms and endoskeleton reinforcements were the top priority. Maybe pulled from their new line of glam rock animatronics. She'd have to see if they had any spare Bonnie parts lying around that they could steal. In the meantime, though, she threw the husk that was once her husband into a life support
Oh, she
pod
never
and used
rebuilt
an
him.
aerosolized remnant to help keep him stable. But more important than recovering his body was recovering his mind. In his current state, he was comatose, an empty shell. Severe brain damage starts at temperatures over 108 degrees Fahrenheit. 42 degrees Celsius, and years of repeated fires had burned his brain to goo. Gone was the brilliant, frustrating mind that had drawn her to him in the first place. But she had a plan. Unlike her darling boy Gregory, Afton had found ways to record his consciousness. Fundamentally, the brain is only a after all, so why couldn't you replicate that in the form of a standard circuit board? In essence, you could create a digital consciousness. And one thing she knew about William, he was nothing if not cautious. A planner, someone who had backup plans to his backup plans. And sure enough, there it was, buried in piles of old animatronic CPUs, a record of Afton himself. But she needed someone to test it.
Someone was definitely here during the night. It had to have been the client. I mean, they sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves.
Unlike the other games that she'd paid to have made in the past, this one had a different purpose. This wasn't about PR, it was about getting William back up and running, spreading his virus to the masses.
You acknowledge that Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for accidental digital consciousness transference, real-world manifestations of digital
Oh my.
She hired a new developer, Silver Parasol.
I didn't even see that, or I didn't even notice that. It says that.
Because of the immersive nature of VR, William's consciousness would be able to merge with the player, giving him a new body, a new agency. There was just one complication. Afton's hold wasn't as powerful as she had hoped. He wasn't able to gain complete control. The first trial run, Jeremy, was so desperate to escape from his grasp that he sliced his own face off with a paper shredder. Messy. Afton's followers were reluctant, to say the least. But it was the second attempt that looked like it had the potential to kill two birds with one stone. Enter Vanessa. Mrs. Afton wanted a surrogate daughter. Her darling Elizabeth would have been a young woman at this point if she had lived. And Clara wanted someone who wasn't Elizabeth but could be just like her. Could she have just rebuilt her like Gregory? Sure, but she decided against it because she wanted an actual human mother-daughter connection. Well, that, and it would be redundant and narratively unsatisfying to have two robot kids in the same family. What could she say? William had put a lot of tools on the table for her to use, and she was planning on using them all. Plus, Elizabeth had always been so loyal to Daddy. It was time to give her a second chance, a true choice. And Vanessa seemed to be the perfect candidate to fill the role.
Your dad's name was Bill? Your dad didn't play fair, did he? He used to make your mum look bad in court. He manipulated you. I know your mum after she lost the custody case.
I was supposed to be a good girl.
She started as a QA tester at Silver Parasol Games, the VR game development company that was part of her plan to bring back William. But more importantly, Vanessa checked all the correct boxes. Right age, blonde, green eyes, with fondness for flowers and the outdoors. In many ways, it was her daughter all over again. Except it wasn't just looks and personality. What really mattered was Vanessa's mind. Underconfident, coming from a broken home, motherless, able to be manipulated. Yes. She would do nicely. She would be the one to save dear old Daddy, just as the real Elizabeth would have wanted.
I will make you proud, Daddy.
While testing the VR game, William's digital consciousness merged with Vanessa. Oh sure, she fought, fragmenting Afton's code into a series of tapes hidden across the game, trying to do web searches to regain control over her life, but it wasn't enough. She was weaker than Jeremy. She was a thrall that, despite occasional moments of lucidity, had to obey. And with Vanessa, it was a 2-for-1 deal. She was getting a daughter back, while also bringing her husband one step closer to reactivation. She just had to make sure that Vanessa was headed the right way. The reborn Gregory was an expert hacker, part of the benefits of being an Afton and a robot. So Clara had him keeping tabs on Vanessa, hacking into her emails and trailing her therapy sessions to ensure the future Elizabeth
why is he in a
was falling
damn
in line.
box?
If any of the therapists started to ask too many questions, they were promptly dismissed from their positions. And while Gregory kept tabs on Vanessa's personal life, Mrs. Afton made sure to clear a path for her professionally. With Silver Parasol's collapse at the hands of the Anomaly, she then had the possessed Vanessa bring the contaminated circuit boards to DLZ shipping and the Fazbear Funtime service. More glitches, more Remnant, more Afton. But it was her last move that was the best. In a true masterpiece of poetry, she brought Vanessa over to be chief security officer at the Pizzaplex. A true family tradition to don the hat and badge, and all it took was a recommendation from the top as well as some emails marked for deletion. Sure, Vanessa didn't have relevant experience for the job, but when it comes directly from the CEO, does it really matter? Husband, son, daughter. A corpse, a robot, a human. All that was left was Michael. Poor, troubled Michael. The boy that killed her youngest. The one that would spend years trying to make his guilty conscience right again. A self-professed protector. While she knew she needed him to complete the family, something told her that the problem had already solved itself. Something had shifted when using Glamrock Freddy to excavate the buried pizza place.
I have been here before. I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I have changed. My friends are here, but I can protect you. I am not me.
Maybe it was the remnant that had coursed through Michael's veins. Maybe it was the spirit of Michael living on as a protector. But he was there, somewhere inside of Glamrock Freddy. She could feel it. And just like that, she'd won.
That makes sense.
She'd done it. Sure, there were still some kinks to work out, some final brainwashing of Vanessa, some rehabilitation of William.
A good amount of it
they
doesn't.
Were there. Finally, all together again under one roof. The Aftons reunited. A happy ending. And that's how it could have ended. That's how it should have ended, had it not been for a few unanticipated developments. For one, something was just wrong with the Pizzaplex. Almost as if the entire building was haunted, possessed. Puppet plushies hiding on ceilings, behind crates, places that they had no earthly way of belonging. Staff bots with greasy tears down their eyes acting like they were being puppeteered by some sort of a nightmare. Even their sounds had the echo of nightmares long past. It was as though a guardian spirit of the past refused to move on. As long as her husband was around, it too would linger. Only now, it wasn't just in one body, but it was in the essence of the building itself. She had seen stories of houses built on burial grounds getting possessed by angry spirits, but she'd never assumed that it could be real. Then again, in a world of living spirit metal and mind-controlling glitches, who was she to be so judgmental? The whole thing was ridiculous. Why would this be the line that she refused to cross? After all, the Pizzaplex was built over the burial ground of angry spirits, but it was the power cords that finally convinced her that something was wrong. Suddenly, these cords were striped black and white, like the security puppet from generations ago. The very foundations of this place, the materials and wires that constituted it, were rebelling against her, against the Aftons, against the quest to bring them all together again. And it was being helped by something else, something slithering through the building. Maybe they were connected, she couldn't be sure, but a blob of living wires could be heard oozing through the walls, stealing pieces and parts of the old animatronics showcased in Rockstar Row. She could only assume that it was a byproduct of all the remnant they'd been collecting. From Afton's testing, she knew that both light and dark remnant existed, one of positive emotions and the other created from anguish, anger, agony. Perhaps this thing was an amalgamation of all the darkest parts of the pizzeria's history, a collection of the hatred still housed inside these defunct endoskeletons and exosuits. As long as it was left alone, it seemed to be harmless. But if any Afton outside of Michael got too close, it would lash out wildly. Even young Gregory, looking to punish the family that had been complicit in its horrible creation. Little did she know, though, that Gregory should have been her biggest concern, that bringing the family together would have some unforeseen consequences. Gregory was normally the goodest of boys. She had literally built him that way. But lately, he'd been disappearing more and more often, disobeying her orders, requests. She knew that he loved playing on the arcade machines once the Pizzaplex closed, being so good as to top the leaderboard on practically all of them. But lately, he was nowhere to be found. She suspected his absence had to do with Glamrock Freddy's failed performance the other night, when he malfunctioned live on stage. Almost as though the core programming of Freddy responded to seeing this rebuilt small boy. Almost like it awakened something inside of him. She'd have to make sure that Vanessa was on the lookout for him. But she'd soon come to learn that Vanessa wasn't enough. Whether it was the influence of the nightmare puppet or a reawakened hatred of animatronics seated deep in Gregory's code, something had caused him to rebel, to rip apart each animatronic in the Pizzaplex. Bit by bit, this boy was tearing down the empire that she'd so painstakingly built, freeing Vanessa from her mind control, destroying the remains of Afton in the basement, setting Glamrock Freddy loose as her carefully created world crumbled around.
That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make sense. Because how's Glamrock Freddy barely seeing Gregory if he's been playing in the arcades the whole time?
her one more time, she began to plot her revenge. She would have to bring them all to ruin. And there you have it, my friends, nearly a decade in the making, my FNAF timeline for where the franchise is here in 2023, the year of Fazbear Frights, by the way. As always, it wouldn't be right for me to finish without going over some of the more controversial takes that I just handed out. I think we can all agree that this part of the timeline was always going to be the hardest, so let me just break down some of the major points. First of all, the biggest swing of this episode, and obviously the one that everything else rests upon, Mrs. Afton being the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment LLC. Here's why I went with this route. Now, first and foremost, the head of Fazbear Entertainment is the single biggest mystery that we're meant to solve at this point in the lore. The Ultimate Guide brings it up repeatedly. Who's running the show? Who is okaying these decisions? And in the security breach memos, we get multiple mentions of someone manipulating things from the top down. Whoever this is, they are the person driving forward every other facet of late-stage FNAF lore here. They're the puppet master who's hiring the indie dev. They're the ones relaunching the brand, building the Pizzaplex over the burial ground. So everything at the end of the timeline relies on this one singular answer. Now, as I see it, there are two possibilities here. One, an adult robot Elizabeth, like we see older versions of robot kids in the fourth closet, or Mrs. Afton. Could it be someone completely new to the franchise? Absolutely yes, but in a game with so many returning faces and repeated themes, it would be pretty random and arbitrary. So, between these two girl bosses, who then would it be? Well, Elizabeth always wants to please her daddy, so she'd be most likely wanting to bring him to life. But then, what's Vanessa's role in all of this? Vanessa is clearly meant to be a parallel for Elizabeth. Same hair, same eyes, similar backstories, but if the main goal is getting the Afton family back together, which seems to clearly be the case in Security Breach, then there's no need for Vanessa to be involved at all. We already have Elizabeth running the show. It would also mean that we suddenly have two robot kids running around, which feels narratively repetitive and quite frankly kind of dumb. Now look at Mrs. Afton. We know next to nothing about her outside of any clues that we can get from Immortal and the Restless and Below.
Oh, this is I forgot, this is before, my bad. This is before Ruined, which is supposed to, which fixes more, or a good amount, or adds more shit, right? Or like it fixes it.
Every other piece of the lore fit. Suddenly, you can have one of every other type of character. One robot kid in Gregory,
makes sense why I did mess up.
One brainwashed human in Elizabeth
because it wasn't
Vanessa,
done.
One OG corpse in William, and one possessed animatronic in Mike. Narratively, it makes everything else cleaner. Legally, it's also the option that makes the most sense. As I call out in my narrative, she'd likely have some stake in the original company and all of its assets. So as Fazbear folds as a company, I'd suspect a lot of it would return back to her. But there was one clue that really sold me on this particular direction, and that was this right here, in the Post-it room, the big lore central of Security Breach, a dinner table scene with the whole family, including the mother. And not only is she there, she is at the head of that table, the position of highest honor and responsibility. She
that makes
is the
sense.
one in charge, with William being relegated off to the side. That one scene shows that we have to include Mom in there somewhere, and the only place it makes sense for her to be is at the top. Now, there is one big dilemma with my interpretation of all this. The Ultimate Guide really seems to point out that the head of Fazbear doesn't want the glitch trap virus to spread. They call out one particular email in FNAF AR where the legal team calls a cease and desist to all action about scanning the circuit boards. And even in FNAF VR, we're told that the circuit boards get stolen back by the client, presumably once they realize what danger is on there, trying to stop glitch trap before he spreads and gets out of hand. Here's the problem with that though. If the head of Fazbear doesn't want Afton to rise again, why'd they restart the company in the first place? Why'd they build over the FNAF 6 pizzeria? Why'd they go through an elaborate cover-up to make the possessed Vanessa an important part of the company? Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It would be the most inconsistent series of actions ever, but I did want to call attention to it since it seems to be the route that the official guide is trying to steer us towards. Moving on to minor point number one, the Five Nights at Freddy's games were made by the Rogue indie developer. Here's the thing, FNAF VR opens with this line.
That's why we have recreated many of these completely fictitious scenarios, lies that you've been fed over the last several years, into a hilarious VR game.
It's recreating the lies told to you by the indie developer, and since Help Wanted has direct recreations of FNAFs 1 through 3, it means the games must be part of the fabrications that this developer made up. Also, all of this is heavily implied in the story of the same name, Help Wanted and Tales of the Pizzaplex, hence FNAF 1 through 3, canon games within the lore of the series. Big swing number 2, the elephant, or ghost in the room, Charlie infecting the Pizzaplex. John from the channel FNAF has made some great findings about Charlie's influence over over the Pizzaplex. The cables that looked like the striped arms of the puppet, the Nightmarion plushies that you find hidden across the Pizzaplex in weird places, the staff bots with creepy smiles and in your dreams written on the front. All of these things scream puppets. Plus, with the puppet mask not having tears in the blob, seems to imply that Charlie's spirit exists elsewhere. She is still in play, and she has an important role, especially in Gregory's post-it room. The doors to the post-it room in the game's code are called Charlie doors, and inside we see a bunch of lit up nightmare staff bot heads. Suspicious to say the least. The channel ID Fantasy did a great theory looking at the post-it notes, concluding that the crying child / Gregory isn't alone in this room, but rather might be communicating with someone. A spirit, Charlie. Charlie's spirit seems to have pulled a poltergeist. Instead of controlling one thing, she's affecting a lot of little details, foundational elements of the Pizzaplex. And this isn't the first time that we've seen this in the franchise either. We've seen spirits communicating with people through physical writing in the survival logbook. So we know that this is an established means of spirit communication within this franchise. And I suspect that to some extent it might be Charlie's influence making Gregory go haywire. Which brings me then to my final and probably biggest controversy in recent
Why is he in a
history,
box?
Gregory as Patient 46, the evil robot mastermind. Now, I know when I first came out with this theory a year ago, people were mad. But here's the thing, you don't have to take my evidence points for it anymore. The recent Tales from the Pizzaplex story GGY basically goes and just outright proves it. In GGY, we find out
He
about
doesn't
a boy
explain.
named Gregory
He
who's
doesn't
getting
explain the
all
fact
high
that Georgie
scores in
was
the
homeless.
Pizzaplex
Huh?
arcade machines. When therapists
That's literally
start
one
to
of the
go
endings.
missing, it's confirmed that GGY is the one that's working to bump them off. And when animatronics start getting corrupted by a mysterious glitch, GGY's letters are found inside the code. He even chooses the code name Dr. Rabbit, for crying out loud. But obviously, by the time of security breach, Gregory is working against Burn Trap, Vanessa, and the animatronics. Why? How? Well, it's not really clear. I tend to believe that something must have happened to cause him to either lose his memory or be reset in some way. Maybe it was Charlie talking to him in his post-it room. Maybe he hit his head. Maybe it was the connection that he made with Mike on stage in Glamrock Freddy. Not exactly sure, and I don't think we have enough clues to solve any of it yet. But it makes sense from a story perspective why he'd start off evil on Afton's side and then switch to trying to destroy him and not knowing who he is in Security Breach. And with that, my friends, I'm wrapping this thing up. Congratulations, we are on page 40. 22,000 words of FNAF, baby. Practically just wrote myself a Tales of the Pizzaplex short story. Have I answered everything? No. Does everything fit cleanly? No. But does it feel like the best and most cohesive narrative for all these characters that addresses most of the evidence we're given? Yeah. For me, honestly, it really does. And let's be honest with ourselves, the DLC will probably come out later this year and prove me completely.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was.
The first time. Then comes the movie, whatever. My descent into madness.
The movies.
But regardless, I am.
The movie fucks everything up. Well, at least
so
this lore
this
fucks
was
everything
a
up.
massive undertaking, and I'm so proud of our editors who have just.
Instead of the security guard looking for his father, he's now looking for a carrot. I don't know why that is, but I don't know why they went that route with the movies, but it is what it is.
The editing across all 4 of these installments. You guys are the best. Thank you for pushing through on 20+ minute uploads. You are unreal, and your talent is unrivaled. I'm so lucky to work with you guys every single day. And like I mentioned before, keep an eye on the channel for an announcement regarding a talkback live stream with some special guests. Was I right? Was I wrong? I want to hear your feedback, so that one's coming up soon. And with that, my friends, we can finally rest. I can leave the demon to its demons with one final reminder that it was all just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
Lore's cool. That last one was a bit messed up, but that's because obviously a lot of other games finally came out, which I think fix it. If you want to see all the parts, they're gonna be looking in the description. It's not a bad theory. It does suck. I did watch an old one because now I've been told there is a lot of different stories. So yeah, maybe that'll be next video, next stream, next VOD, or whatever. If you want to check out the next reaction of the other theories that disproves this one or adds new stuff, then check the video in the middle.